Hello and welcome, OpenChat Bot developers. So, this is going to be more of a theoretical overview of the OpenChat Bot framework. I'm going to explain at a high level what the key concepts are and how the whole thing hangs together. So, don't be tempted to skip this. There will be more practical videos to follow, including code walkthroughs and live code demos, but I promise you it will be easier to let me familiarize you with some important concepts before we dive into the details. I think it'll make it clearer as we go forward. So there'll be no demos in this video and there'll be no code, just talk. So, what is a bot? A piece of server software that interacts with the OpenChat backend on behalf of another user or system. So this software can be written in any technology you like. It can be an internet computer canister, a Node.js web server, AWS Lambda function, anything at all. As long as it can receive and make HTTP requests, then you can use it. And it simply exists to sit between the OpenChat user or the external system and the OpenChat backend. And that, in a nutshell, is all there is to it. So let's look at some key concepts that we're going to need to understand. We've got authentication and authorization. We've got the installation location for bots and the action scope of bots. These are kind of some quite important things to understand before you dive into the examples and dive into the code. So before we get into different types of bots that we create for different use cases, we're just going to run through these things and try and understand them at a high level. So let's start off with authentication and authorization. So when a bot tries to communicate with the OpenChat backend, we need to be able to identify the bot and establish that the bot is allowed to do whatever it's attempting to do. So to authenticate the identity of a bot, we require that the bot is registered with a principal. We'll see that going forward with demos and whatnot. And all calls that the bot makes to the OpenChat backend must be made using an identity derived from this principal. This is the first line of defense, just allowing OpenChat to understand who the bot is. So in addition to that authentication piece, we also need to know that the bot is authorized to do the specific action that it's attempting. So in practice, this means determining that the bot has been granted the correct permissions based on what it's trying to do, and that it's been given access to the correct scope. And by scope, we kind of mean where it's trying to do the thing it's trying to do. We're going to talk a little bit more about scope in a minute, so we'll come back to that. So in order to prove that the bot meets these criteria, the kind of the who and the what, the bot must present a credential with every interaction with the OC backend. And we're going to go into the different kinds of credentials that can be used in different use cases in a little bit more detail in a minute. But before we do that, before we talk about that in detail, I want to talk about these remaining concepts on this slide. So first of all, we've got installation location. So it's important to understand that while a bot is registered globally with the OpenChat system, setting aside test mode for the moment, they are actually installed into a particular context or location by the owner of that context location. So bots can be installed into communities where they will also be available to the community's channels, or they can be installed in top-level groups, or as direct chats where only you will see the interaction with the bot. So that's the installation location piece. The action scope, closely related to this idea of installation location and the concept of authorization. So when you install a bot, you grant it permission to act within that particular scope and nowhere else. Okay? Bots are never allowed to operate globally, and they can only be given permission to operate within a scope by the owner of that scope. So some scopes are hierarchical, course, bear in mind, if you have permission to operate at the community scope, then you also have permission by definition to operate at the channel scope for channels within that community. So understanding what scope you're operating in will help you understand the operations available to you, and it will definitely make certain error conditions that you might encounter make a lot more sense. For example, if you try and create a channel when you're operating within a group scope, you're going to get an error from the OpenChat backend, and you will understand that error better once you understand this concept of scope. Okay, let's turn back to the topic of authentication, authorization, and the credentials that are used. So before we get started digging into what these different forms of credentials are, it's worth pointing out that the handling of these credentials is largely taken care of for you by the relevant SDK code for your chosen platform. So your job will simply be to pass on the JWT that you're given, or the credential that you're given, and the SDK will do the rest. So those credentials will be automatically parsed, verified, decoded, and relayed to OpenChat on your behalf. So most of this explanation is just background information for your understanding. With that said, it's still a good idea to understand what they are and where they come from. So we have two main types of credential that we can use, and they loosely correspond to the types of use case that we're supporting. So let's first look at the JWTs. JWT standing for JSON Web Token. It's just an encoded string. If we've been building a bot that handles slash commands from OpenChat users, for example, an AI bot that exposes like a slash prompt command for OpenChat users to use, then the sequence of events looks like this. The user selects the command from inside the UI. They enter the prompt that they want to send to the bot. Then the OpenChat front end says to the OpenChat backend, this user would like to authorize this bot to execute this command with these parameters. All being well, the OpenChat backend will respond with a short-lived JWT signed with its own private key, which will encode all of the relevant information about the request, which includes the command and its arguments, the permissions granted to the bot, and the action scope in which the request was made. This JWT is then sent to the execute command endpoint of the bot. In almost all cases, we would expect the bot developer to be using the SDK, so the SDK code will then be used to verify and decode the JWT. The SDK will have been initialized with the OpenChat public key, so it will be able to verify this JWT signature is genuinely coming from OpenChat. We'll decode the JWT, and that will give access to the bot developer to all the information contained within, allowing them to route the request and perform whatever actions they want to perform. This JWT will only be valid for a short time and will typically only live the duration of a single web request in service of a single slash command from a user. So that's the typical use case that we'll see JWTs being used. So the other main form of credential is the API key. So the rule of thumb here is that you will need an API key if the initiator of the interaction between your bot and the OpenChat backend is not an OpenChat user. So that might mean that the initiator of the interaction is an external system, for example. You might want to receive a message from GitHub when a pull request is merged into your repo and send a message to a specific OpenChat channel. So this we would refer to as integration mode. Or it might mean that the initiator of the interaction between the bot and OpenChat is the bot itself. So if we take the reminder bot as an example, a reminder bot, the user might configure a reminder to be triggered in 1 week's time. The bot must autonomously decide when to perform that interaction with the OpenChat backend. And this we would refer to as autonomous mode. So in both of these cases, an API key is required. An API key is always generated for a specific action scope. So it encodes specific permissions within that scope. So you would generate an API key within a community, or within a channel, or within a group, or within a direct chat, and whatever permissions you encode into that API key will be restricted to that scope. So when a bot uses an API key as a credential, the OpenChat backend will know which scope they're operating in, which permissions they have been granted, and it can restrict the operations accordingly. So when an API key has been generated, the user has the option to simply copy the key, which allows them to use it in an integration. For example, they may wish to store the key as a secret in GitHub to support the previously mentioned GitHub integration case. But the user will also have the option to securely send the API key to the bot itself. You might do that if you needed the bot to be able to operate autonomously at some point in the future using the key. It's up to the bot to manage these keys, but we will send the key to the bot. There is SDK support to help track which scopes have corresponding API keys, because obviously the bot will probably have to maintain multiple keys if it's used in multiple different scopes. But this is nonetheless something that will require some special care from the bot developer. Notably, it will be important to consider the persistence of these keys. If your bot crashes, you don't want to lose all your keys, because your bot's not going to work the way it's supposed to if you lose your keys. So I think those are the high-level concepts that I wanted to talk through in this video. Don't want to overwhelm you with more than that. So next steps. This has just been an overview of these core concepts and the framework itself. Don't worry, there will be more content to cover more practical side of things, like how you get OpenChat up and running locally, how to register one of the sample bots. I'm also going to be doing some in-depth walkthroughs of the sample code for both TypeScript and Rust, and potentially Motoko as well. And we'll show off the various features using the different sample bots as we go through them. We will also potentially do some more content on actually creating a new bot from scratch, just to show you how you can get going on your own. So I hope you found this helpful. Get in touch on OpenChat if you have questions, and happy building. Your next steps, as you can see here, just need to have a great idea. Choose your platform, look at the examples, and as and when we create these videos, go through them. And if you get stuck in any way, just let us know. Cheers, bye-bye.